This is a Geek Leader podcast, and I'm your host, John Rauda. This show is all about helping us grow as leaders, become better technologists, and improve our lives both at work and at home. I hope you enjoy the show and learn a lot. Welcome to a Geek Leader podcast. I'm your host, John Rauda. And if you could, please do me a favor and take a moment and leave a rating and review in whatever podcast player you're listening to this on, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, doesn't matter. I would greatly appreciate it. And that feedback really helps get other listeners to the show. Also, if you're not subscribed, go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And if you feel so inclined, you can go to geekleader.com/tip and donate to the show. Thanks so much. All right, Geek Leaders, today I'm honored to have Chad Brown on the show today. One thing about Chad is that he has started a media company back in the day, and now he coaches leaders like you and I to help us become better leaders. And he talks a little bit about the art and science of leadership, as well as helping people grow good teams, whether it be entrepreneurs or corporate leaders. It doesn't matter. He helps all of them. And with all that being said, Chad, welcome to the show.
I'm happy to be here, John. Thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, if you don't mind, just tell the audience a little bit about your background, how you got to where you are today, and why you decided to get into coaching.
Yeah, that's a long story. We can kind of break it down along the way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, we can break through it.
Okay, cool. I started a media production company in 2009. That was my forte into real leadership. I'd always had kind of an entrepreneur bent. Mm-hmm. I always wanted to do something for myself, work for myself. But that was the first time when I started Shade Tree Films. That was honestly the first time that something was successful enough to where I needed to start building a team. And man, what an incredible journey that was. It was all, everything I learned in that journey was from complete failure. By the way, I watched your TEDx talk and related so much to when you talked about learning your lessons from failure. That's my story exactly. We can get into some of those moments for me. Started that in 2009, grew it really rapidly for about 10 years. In that process, got introduced to this whole crazy thing that I didn't even know existed, which is coaching, business coaching or leadership coaching. Because things got so bad, we hired a business coach, and that changed my life. Honestly, I thought it was going to be about the business, new systems, better way of spending, investing money, blah, 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 blah. And ultimately it was just a life altering experience. It, changed the way that I was because when I was running this company at the height of it, I was not proud of who I'd become. I was not proud of the husband that I was and the father that I was, most importantly. And then on down the line. And so this coach really helped me turn it all around, took me through some pretty big milestones, ultimately to sell that company. And then I started working with him, doing the same work, coaching and consulting other teams in their leadership and in their business success.
Cool. So you mentioned that you weren't happy with the father and husband, and I kind of got to that point too when I was first becoming a manager, when I was working late hours and not present, I guess you would say. And I think it was right after my second kid was born. I went to my boss, and I just basically said, "Hey, I'm going to leave work at between 5 and 5:30, and I'm not going to check email, and I'm not going to check my phone until after my kids go to bed, which is probably about 8 o'clock. And then after that, I'll check in. If there's an emergency, I'll jump online and do whatever. But just so you know, I will be leaving work at 5:30, between 5 and 5:30. I'm not going to stay any later." And he's like, "I don't know if that's going to work." And you know what? Everything was fine. So it was fine.
Imagine that. The world didn't fall apart.
I know. It was like all this built up fear and this whole culture that, the company had kind of built that, you're in management, you're going to stay until 7, 8 o'clock, and for what? Yeah.
Yeah. I can, my journey in that was a little bit different. Well, I don't know about different, but my motivation seems like it was a little bit different. Not like you are dedicated to just getting stuff done. I realized through the coaching process that it was really an ego trip for me. We had created a lot of success very, very quickly. We became a known name in the industry for small production companies. Started getting invited to come speak on stages and teach workshops. We developed an educational arm of our business, and we were traveling over 300 days out of the year.
Holy cow.
Because these big brands wanted us, and it felt really good to do this big, quote unquote, important work. As you talk about, I love your story. It was all okay. Same thing with me is if we don't take this contract from this really big brand, if we say no to this one because we've got 5 others, well, what will happen? The world might fall apart. The business might go under. And ultimately, what I wasn't saying, but what I was feeling, and I've come to terms with this. So I say it flippantly. At the time, it wasn't flippant at all. Is I just wanted another check mark on the ego sheet. I wanted another accomplishment, more money, more success, more, people asking us how we do it, and, all of that sort of stuff. So for me, it was really a journey. It was challenging to come to grips with that's really what was motivating me. And I was same thing. I had my first 2 kids at the time when I started this business. Our second was she was 6 months, and we loaded up the car from Utah, drove down what we could fit into a Scion XB, which is a teeny tiny refrigerator on wheels, if you know what those are. And they don't fit a lot, especially when you have 2 car seats in them. And we drove down to Southern California to start this business. I bunked up with another friend and his family in a 2-bedroom apartment for about 2 months, literally with nothing. There wasn't even a company formed. And we built this thing. He and I built this thing together. And so we went from that. And then moved my family into a small apartment, and I was gone. My wife was essentially a single mom. And even when I was home, which was barely at all, I was not present. I was concerned about the business. I was thinking about the business. How do we grow? What do we do next? How do we make this deadline? Blah, 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 blah. And I just made up that it was all so important. And I was just missing what was most important in front of me. And I work with leaders every single day in corporations that feel the same thing. If I'm not present to this thing all of the time, it will fall apart and the world will end.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think ego goes into that a lot, because, and you kind of trick yourself because I did this too. I tricked myself to saying well, I have to be here because I'm providing for my family,
It's all for them. That's the lie.
Yeah, it's all for them. But in reality, it's because you are choosing to do that. Nobody asked you to disappear. They would rather you be there and make less money than be gone and make more.
Yeah, I always tell leaders the best lie, the most insidious, believable lie you can tell yourself is that you're doing it for your family,
or that you don't have a choice. That's another one.
Right. Yeah, that's a good one too.
I have no choice. Yeah, I have to do this because it's my job. Choose to work there. You have choices. I want to get into the ego thing because that's another thing that I've also struggled with. And, for me, it kind of manifests itself in the way that as a manager, a lot of times I feel like I can do a better job than people that report to me. And I know that's not necessarily true. I may do it differently, but not better. But in my mind, it's like the ego says, well, I am better. I can do this better.
Sure.
And although when I try to prove that, it's, reality tells me otherwise many times that other people are better than me, but it's that ego thing. What do you tell clients that you're coaching, to help them get a grip on that ego?
Well, we really have to shift what we think a good, quote unquote, good manager is. Because most people think that a good manager is somebody that can do all of the tasks really well on their team. That is a huge misconception. And that's what drives this kind of behavior where we're engaged all of the time, doing all of the things. Actually, a good manager, and this isn't new news to anybody that's listening, but we often don't apply it tactically in our day-to-day life, is that a good leader is somebody who identifies people that can do things better than them and brings them onto their team and leads them well. So ultimately, a good leader works themselves out of a job. Not and they don't, right? Because somebody needs to be in that leadership position, but they work themselves out of the day-to-day tasks that need to be done on the team and ultimately become that resource of somebody who can help them see blind spots, who can help them brainstorm new and better solutions. That's the role of the leader. But the leader thinks that they need to be able to do everything better than anybody on their team. And then ultimately they become the linchpin or the bottleneck for all productivity on the team. And that in and of itself can be an ego move, which is like, everything's got to come through me. I've got to be last say, and I've got to find something wrong or something that can be done better through the things that people, and my encouragement to anybody in a leadership or wanting to be in a leadership role at this moment is think about what would it look like to have a team of people who can do all of these things better than you can.
Mm-hmm. I think that's absolutely spot on. And I know when I was first a manager and I was having people quit and I wasn't very good at it, I had a mentor that just told me flat out, like, you don't scale. Like if you're having everybody go through you, you can't scale. And if you want to scale your team to do more than one person's job, I had a team of 6 at the time. It's like, if you think, if you want to scale this to actually be doing the work of 6 people, then you need to get out of the way and, start leading people and not micromanaging their outcomes.
That's right. As soon as you can scale as a leader, I see this all of the time. I'll come onto a team and a team of 6 is doing the amount of work 2 people could do if they were full-time contributors, ICs. And ultimately working with the leader, we can get that team into doing 6 people's worth of work or 7 people's worth of work because of letting go of some of those day-to-day things that they're not even that good at anyway. And that's the reason they have somebody on their team. So it's 100% true. It's like, and when we look at the lack of productivity, we look at, because every company in a growth stage will discover this at some point, is that the more people you bring on, the less you get done.
Yeah.
And that's crazy. It blows CEOs' minds and COOs' minds. Like, what is going on here? Especially new, first-time founders. They're like, we're bringing on more people and we're producing less. And ultimately what's happening is we're bringing on more people, but we're running all of that work through just a couple of people who become those bottlenecks. And they don't know how to lead effectively in a way that it excels all the people and we can get as much production out of that as possible.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I think, part of that is when you bring on more people, you've got to, have oversight. And one of the things that I know you talk about is trust. And when you bring on new people, it's hard to develop that trust.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What are some ways as leaders that we can, not only trust people, but have them trust you as well? And I struggled with that for a while. Even people, like when I became a manager, I was promoted into, out of a group that I was already in. So I already worked with the people and I didn't trust them even, after I became their boss, but I did before, which is weird. I know, but, what do you find when it comes to trust issues of leaders?
So trust is an interesting thing because I talk about it a bit differently than anybody else that I've heard talk about trust. I actually don't believe that trust is built, quote unquote built. I say that trust is chosen, period. You choose when you're going to give trust and when you're not. It doesn't, does some history help? Sure, it does. However, one question I've never had a leader be able to answer when they think building trust is the principle is, okay, when exactly, tell me exactly when you choose to give the trust, if it's built. Like, is it over time? So what does that have to do with, or how do you treat that with bringing somebody new onto the team? How long until you're going to trust them?
That's a great question. And, I've never heard anybody put it that way, but it makes a lot of sense because I had a boss who's since retired, but what he told me when he hired me, and I started asking because I thought I had to earn that trust and build that up. He's like, I wouldn't have hired you if I didn't trust you. I trust you until you lose it.
That's right.
Left me alone. And, he was probably one of the best bosses I've ever had. But, he had that mindset of, I hired you, therefore I trust you. And you don't have to earn anything.
That's right. Good leaders can trust from day one because they've done their due diligence. They've paid attention. They've listened to the people that they've decided to do work with. Even if you've inherited them, I don't care. The process is the same. And the other reason that they trust from day one is because the systems that they put in place are solid, meaning the systems will give you feedback. If anything is missing, the systems will give you feedback almost instantaneously so that you can go to the person who's missing something and have that conversation. So trust, we treat it like the golden calf that is mysterious, and at some point it will just bless itself with us if we complete enough commitments, if we do enough work together, if we spend enough time together, and it just doesn't work that way. It's literally just a decision that we make. And when we make that decision, there's two types of trust that I talk about. The first one is called immature trust. And immature trust is, I trust you, John, so I don't have to pay attention to you. Now, this is the most common type of trust that people think is like it's actually celebrated, this kind of trust. And it's immature because, and Jordan Peterson has this really great line where he says, all of us have snakes in us, and all of us will betray each other at one time or another. And so mature trust is, John, I trust you, knowing that any moment you could betray me because you're human. And when I say betray, it could be anything. It's not insidious. It's not sinister. It's just, you might miss a deadline. You might not complete this commitment that you said you would. That's the betrayal that I'm talking about. And I'm going to pay attention to you in a very specific way if I know that at any moment the circumstances of your life could change and you could drop the ball somewhere. Now, it doesn't mean I'm going to micromanage you. No, not by any means. I'm going to pay attention to you. I'm going to listen to you. I'm going to have checks and balances in place in my systems so that it keeps a gauge on our relationship, so that if anything looks off at any moment, I could just say, hey, John, what's going on with you, man? It seems like something might be off.
No, I think you're absolutely right. And, especially when you get into, that quote you mentioned from Jordan Peterson, I think that's fantastic because, everybody's going to fall. Everybody's going to make a mistake and, disappoint somebody sometime. And it's just understanding that point that, to be ready for when that happens, they have a way back. There's a path back, and there's grace given. And also, you the way you said it was that, I trust you, so I don't have to pay attention to you. But if you look at why people hate their boss, the number one reason why they don't like their boss is because they feel like they're neglected. People would rather have a, criticizing boss than an absent boss.
Yeah, I that's an interesting point. I've never thought of it that way. Certainly, I want an engaged boss. Certainly, right. I want an engaged leader, and I also want that trust. One thing that I talk about is giving accountability without authority. So this doesn't work because what this looks like is, John, I give you the accountability of owning some piece of our department, right? This metric you own, John. You're accountable for it. You've got to report on it to the leadership team or to whoever, and you're accountable for it. But I'm not going to give you, and usually I don't say it this way, or people don't say it this way, but in my actions, I don't give you the authority to actually affect that metric, because everything has to come through me. It has to be my idea. I have to check all of it. So ultimately, the authority is on me, but you are accountable for it. And that sets you up. That puts you between a rock and a hard place because you're accountable for the result, but you can't affect it. And that's a terrible place to be.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. It's like one of those things where you ask somebody to do something, but you have to approve all purchases. Well, then obviously I don't have the authority to do it.
Right.
Give me the budget too. I got to have the budget.
And by the way, it tells you, hey, John, I don't trust you. So
absolutely.
I'll just use you like a tool. I'll use you as if I'll use you to get something done, but ultimately I'm the one pulling the strings.
Yeah. Go ahead.
This was one of the most challenging lessons that I learned running my media production company. The first time I ever had to let somebody go was because this is exactly what I had done. This is exactly what I had created, is I had given him accountability for the success of a certain project. Now it wasn't just based on this one project. Obviously, we had a whole history and it had all been building up to this moment. But I had given him the accountability for this project, but never the authority to affect its success. Everything had to go on me, but we were running 1,000,000 miles an hour in 1,000 different directions. So my availability was limited. And something went wrong on this project with a really big client. I think the client was Volkswagen. It was one of their larger events of the year. And a couple of things went really poorly with this project. We didn't end up getting some content that was necessary for the final project. And I ended up letting him go. And it wasn't till years later that I learned this principle, and I realized, oh my gosh, I, as the leader, quote unquote leader, terrible leader, I am the one who sabotaged that project, withholding the authority. If he had had the authority, my guess is, my hope is that he actually would have made some really solid decisions for the project and got it done. However, I had reserved that for myself.
Yeah, it's like you were giving him accountability with no authority.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, so another thing that tends to happen a lot with leaders is almost the same thing, but instead of withholding authority, people withhold information.
Of course.
How is it that we get past that? Because, we're almost taught, at least I was in corporate America, that there's, you're on a need to know basis. And we've always heard those kind of things. And whenever people withhold information, that limits our ability to make proper decisions. How is it that you get to leaders to the point where they can trust to share information?
Well, one thing you got to understand is that information is a social currency in an organization. So people see that as often people see that as they will hoard or hold on to that currency, thinking that makes them more valuable to the team. And I know it sounds really weird to say it that way, like in this context. It sounds strange, and it's not conscious. Nobody's running around thinking, I've got some information and this is my currency and I'm going to hold on to it because it's going to make me more valuable. No, they're just thinking, they're just surviving in this corporation or this organization that has a ladder that everybody's clawing to climb. And I say everybody, I know it's not everybody, but a good majority of people are wanting to progress in their profession. And so it becomes this competition almost of what information can I have that others don't, and how do I act on that information that makes me look better, makes me look more valuable. And ultimately, this will kill a culture and a success. I work a lot with tech startups, and I can tell within a couple of hours when we're doing our introductory work, I can tell how they relate to information, who's holding on to information, who's giving information freely. And I can make a pretty accurate, I've done it a couple times, I can make a pretty accurate prediction on their success as a team dependent on how generous they are with their information. Those who have no attachment to information like holding it and give it generously will move faster. They'll be more productive. They'll get the problems on the table sooner, and they will have creative solutions sooner. And that's all from generously communicating any information that's available, even if you're not actively holding on to it, but even if you don't think it will benefit the other party, sharing the information anyway can open up all sorts of opportunities and possibilities, because more minds is always better than one.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely great. And, it's one of those things that I moved into a role at one time where I took a different person's job. And when I got promoted into that role after that person retired, I discovered that they didn't have any communications with their peers. They did everything through a silo. Like their whole org was basically just a silo. And it was like, why didn't they have communication with their peers? And once I opened up the boundaries of having those, one-on-ones with peers, the job got infinitely easier. Because I had the proper communication. I had the information that I needed to make decisions. They had information that they needed. We weren't butting heads and, working on parallel projects. We were working together on projects instead of, independent tracks, which made things just so much easier.
Yeah. The other reason people hold on to information too is because it can be incriminating.
Oh,
right. The more information that's out there, especially around the work that you're doing, the more exposure you have to the rest of the team. And then it's going to be apparent whether or not you're performing, which it would make sense if you're not performing well and it, you would want to withhold as much information as possible. I have a client that I'm working with right now. She's in the med tech space, and she's the executive in charge of combining the medical side of it, the patient care side of it, with the tech. She's that bridge. Really, this is my first experience in the med tech area. Really, really interesting to combine those two. And she has, to put it frank, she has a manager who is, let's just say, not performing well. And he's absolutely afraid of information going cross-functionally. So everything, the way he has it set up right now, is everything that she's doing has to go through him before it can go out to the leadership team or the rest of the company. This is a recipe for disaster. And I'm coaching with her to lead up in a way that's going to help him become more transparent, more vulnerable in his position, ultimately get his performance up. Because if he gets his performance up, he'll be willing to share information, I think, hopefully. But man, it's such an interesting, there's a few reasons people want to hold on to information, not communicate. But man, it is, I do know for one thing, it is damning to the process, the product, and the results.
Yeah, it sounds almost like fear is a big part of that.
Absolutely.
Whether it be fear of losing your job, so you want to hold on to the information and make you more valuable, fear of looking stupid by sharing information, or fear of the incrimination like we're talking about.
Yeah, that's right. And it's a cultural thing too, right? So if you have a culture that doesn't celebrate failure, or if you have a culture that isn't tolerant or isn't willing to let you explore and have bad ideas, then you're probably going to live out protecting yourself from being ridiculed, which is going to keep you from expressing your ideas freely. And you also don't want any, I always work with cultures, hey, let's celebrate failure, meaning not that we don't want to hit our results, not that we don't want to perform, not that we don't want to take care of our clients or our customers. Of course we do. And we're dedicated to success, but we know that failure is an essential part to doing those things. Mm-hmm. So we recognize and expect the failure. It's just like what you were talking about earlier, John. I thought you put it so well when you said, each leader, these aren't the words you said, but what I heard you say was, each leader needs to expect their people, each one of their people, to fail in some way. to miss the mark, to miss a deadline, or not execute an idea or a project well. And the more we accept that as part of our culture and be in it together, then there's less that we think we need to hide.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And how do you develop that culture of celebrating failures? Well, let's say you're director of technology for a company and you've got, a couple of managers underneath you. How would you want to instill a culture of celebrating those failures versus, condemning them? And you always hear about that old story. I think it was Hewlett-Packard where some guy, lost him like, $500,000 on a project or something. And he came in to tell his boss, expecting to be fired. He says, "Why would I fire you? I just spent $500,000, training you or teaching you this lesson." But how do you actually truly instill that kind of culture in your team?
Well, the first thing I want people to understand is it's not natural.
Mm.
We are survival creatures, and we're survival creatures who have been, evolutionarily, we have been created to operate in packs of 100 or less, and the way that we relate to each other is everything. Though, your opinion of me, if we're in the same crew together, if your opinion of me is poor, I run a risk of not belonging to the tribe. And if I don't belong to the tribe, I'm left out in isolation. That's death.
Yeah.
And so most people are still operating with this machinery within their brain. And this is, you talked about the science of leadership. You were interested in the science. This is one of the principles of science leadership, is that we are survival animals. We run the mechanism of survival. So we don't want to stand out. We don't want to, we want to belong at any cost. Just remember that. And that alone can start to shift the thinking around, of course you would want to hide this failure. Of course you would, because I totally get it, because you don't want to be rejected, because that means death to your lizard brain, to your survival brain. Now, I will say it's a muscle that we must exercise and flex over and over and over and over again. And that looks like, as a leader, first, very, very first, as a leader, being vulnerable and being transparent with your own failures. This is where it breaks down most commonly.
Yeah, I could see that being kind of one of the hardest parts is, ego gets in the way, right? Going back to that, when you have your own failures, and to share that and be vulnerable about that.
That's right. And nobody on your team, if you're clearly, and by the way, each human has spidey senses for this. And that's the truth, is like, you'll know if somebody's not being totally honest with you about something. And if you sense that the person leading your department is covering up or sugarcoating one of their failures, what your brain does automatically, subconsciously, you don't get a vote on it. Your brain says, "Oh, it's not safe to talk about failure here. It's not safe to talk about failure here. So I also must cover those things up at any cost." But when a leader steps up and shows that vulnerability, shows that failure, then those who are on the team go, "Oh, wow, I guess it's cool if we talk about it around here. Yes, we can, play with it like it happens and then move on from it." And what I notice on a team is when you have a team of people who are willing to do that and exercise that muscle. The reason I say exercise or practice is because there's no perfection. So we'll do it at times and we won't do it at other times. But what happens is when it's the standard set on the team and it's practiced, when we don't do it, we will call each other up into it. Meaning, if I'm on a team and the culture has set failure as a principle or failure as a value, and then I start trying to hide one of my failures because of the precedent that we've set and the practice that we've been engaging in, most likely somebody on that team is going to come up, going to call me up into talking about it in a way that I haven't been willing to up until then. So it's really, an opportunity for the group to support each other and call each other into that kind of courage. And I call it courage because it absolutely is an act of courage. Each time, and it may never get easier. That's the other thing that I want to stress to people. This practice may never get easier. It might always require courage. It doesn't mean it's not worth it or not valuable.
No, I think that's absolutely correct. And, it definitely takes bravery to do things like that. But it takes you back to that circle we talked about earlier about, sharing information. You're not hiding that. You're openly, putting yourself in a vulnerable situation in order to share information and, encourage that open communication.
That's right. I have another client that I work with deeply. I work with their entire leadership team. There's 7 on the leadership team now. And we've been hiring, we've hired 3 new executives in the last 6 months. It's growing fast. And each executive that comes in is so interesting to watch them, right? Because they've been trained, taught, and educated by the corporate system. And the corporate system is you don't talk about your failures, you don't get vulnerable in that way. Feedback, like the way that we do feedback. I won't go into all of it, but it's been so interesting to watch each one of those executives come into this culture because the CEO and COO and the founders of this company are so dead set on creating a culture that is transparent, vulnerable, communicative, shares information freely. They live it. And to watch these executives come in and just feel like they're in the upside down world. They really do. And when they start to protect themselves by not sharing information or, sugarcoating a failure or something like that. By the way, I should say, when I say failure, I just mean not hitting the results that we intended to hit. Of course, there's all the nuance to these ideas of which is like nothing's a failure if you learn from it and get back up. I believe that too. But when I talk about failure in this context, I'm just talking about we set out to create a certain result and we didn't create it. But to watch them feel like a fish out of water and the team surround them and say, look, no, here we share it all. So please bring it all to us. We can handle it. We can play with it. And ultimately, we're going to create a better result. We're going to have a better postmortem. We're going to, learn more from it if we do it together. And to just see these executives' worlds just rocked and their minds are scrambled because they can't even understand that a team of people could relate to each other this way.
Mm. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think you hit the nail on the head when it comes to that. Chad, it's been a great conversation. I really appreciate you sharing this information with us, and hopefully it helps some leaders grow their team and become more engaged with their team and have more courage and to share information more. How can people connect with you online, learn more about what you're doing, and maybe if they need help, connect with you for that?
Yeah, I want to offer anybody listening access to an assessment that I built. It's called the 4 Pillars of Founder Freedom. Don't be fooled by the founder part of it. I do work mostly with founders, but you could replace that with leader. The 4 Pillars of Leader Freedom. So accountability, communication, trust and culture, and scalable systems are the 4 pillars that I've identified. This assessment, you can answer, I think it's 15 questions, takes less than 5 minutes, and it will measure you on each of those 4 pillars, show you where you're doing really well, show you where there might be opportunities for improvement, and then give suggestions for that improvement based on your answers. You can find that at founder-freedom.com. Take that assessment for absolutely free, and then that's also a great way to be connected to me.
Awesome. I'll link that in the show notes too at geekleader.com so people can click through from this episode and take that assessment. Thanks so much for that, Chad. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, John. This has been great. I appreciate you.
Hope you enjoyed the show. Please go to geekleader.com to learn more about what this guest is up to. Click on their links and connect with them online. I would also greatly appreciate it if you could leave me a rating and review in Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to the show. And make sure you've subscribed if you haven't already. And if you feel so inclined, you can leave me a tip by going to geekleader.com/tip.